Hi and welcome to Sound Basics Part 9. We're going to talk about sound localization today. Let's start with this video.
Jibo, look at me, Jibo. Jibo, you too. Jibo, on the right. Hey, Jibo.
Hey, Cynthia.
Hey, how are you guys doing? Hey, Jibos.
Hey, Cynthia.
Hi. Okay, Jibos, look over here. Look over here, big guys. Good job.
So, how's this done? Well, you notice that we can't see it right now, but they have sensors on both sides of their heads, I guess, is if you want to call it that. Yeah, and so they're mimicking the human hearing and how we locate things in space. So let's take a closer look at how we actually do that. There's a couple of different things that we rely on to be able to tell where things are in space. So we have these things called monoaural cues or spectral notches, and we'll talk more about that. And that lets us sense elevation. Okay, and then there's an interaural time difference, or ITD. Basically, it's the difference between a sound hitting one ear and the other. So there could be a slight time difference between a sound hitting, say, our right ear and then our sound hitting our left ear. So our brain is able to use that cue very effectively at locating, pretty precisely where that sound is coming from. And then also it relies on interaural level difference, or ILD, or sometimes it's interaural intensity difference, IID. So basically, a sound coming to you, for example, here, it's going to be a little bit louder on one side and quieter on the next side. So let's look at ITD, interaural time difference. Okay, and these are azimuth cues. So basically, like a 360-degree around us, right? And it's a timing difference of a sound reaching either ear, and it's about 0.6 milliseconds to go around the head. Okay, so we're our brain's very good at sensing and making using very slight delays between two ears, right? So if you look here, it's a 0.69 millisecond delay. So, these are all like less than a millisecond, right? To the left ear. Okay, 0.69 millisecond to the right ear. But we can distinguish between a 0.69 millisecond delay and a 0.55 millisecond delay. So just these little tiny differences. If the delay is instead 0.55 seconds, it sounds like it's coming from here, right? Et cetera, et cetera. 0.27 millisecond delay will sound like it's coming from here, and no difference between the ears, so on and so forth. Okay, and same for the other side, right? So our ears and our brains are able to interpret very, very small differences in time delays between our two ears, and that gives us a really quite an accurate picture of where the sound is actually coming from. And then there's IID or ILD, interaural intensity difference or interaural level difference. And so we have a head shadow. Our head casts a shadow, right, in terms of level. So what happens is one sound will be a little bit louder coming into our ear, and then it'll be quieter as it goes to the other side. Okay, and this generally applies to high frequencies because then they kind of are reflected off, and then we cast this sound shadow, whereas lower frequencies just tend to go right around our head. All right, so so if it's a little bit louder coming to our right ear, a little quieter coming to our left ear, we're going to get a sense of where that sound source is coming from, and it works, of course, together in conjunction with the ITD as well. And then another cue that we receive that really has a lot to do with elevation is called HRTF, or head-related transfer function. And what do we mean by that? Basically, our head, and in particular, the pinnae of our ears, this kind of weird cartilage, with all these folds and stuff like that, these things are quite instrumental in helping us hear elevation. right? And what happens is the pinna works together with your head to create a filter. And this is an example of a filter. Generally, what happens is there's a notch filter. That means there's a certain frequency that's quite attenuated in this manner, right? So if it follows this kind of shape, this attenuation right about here, wherever this is, about 9 kilohertz, right? So about 9,000 hertz. We're going to sense that signal as coming from about 40 degrees above the ear, right? Now, this is a different HRTF, a different notch that's happening at about 11,000 hertz, and then with this other shape too, that's all significant. And that's going to be even, so no elevation. And then we have these, which actually has about 3 notches here, and that's going to sound like it's coming from below us. So our brains and our hearing system is really quite good at using these different cues, these different timing cues, these filtering cues, and these level cues to help us locate where sounds are coming from. We're pretty good at that. All right. Let's see. Right. Okay. Now, let's talk about a couple different phenomenon. That again, these are psychoacoustic things that they apply to us just because it's part of how our brain works. There's a phenomenon known as the precedence effect. All right, and when it says it's a binaural psychoacoustic effect, meaning it has to do with both ears, right? It's binaural. So if there's a 0 to 1 millisecond delay of a sound coming from 2 speakers, we determine the noise as one sound, and the location shifts depending on where the sound came from first. Okay, so if it's under 1 millisecond delay between one side and another, well, if the signals are reaching to us at the simultaneous at the same time, we're going to hear as if it's coming from the middle. Now, if there is a slight delay, we're talking about the same signal now, right? Okay, so if the same signal is coming to us out of both speakers, except the signal's coming here, and then maybe in the right, it's delayed somewhere between 0 and 1 millisecond. We still perceive it as one sound, but we perceive it as coming from slightly, slightly offset a little bit, not in the center. All right. Now, if there's a delay between 1 to 5 milliseconds, and this here's the precedent effect, we only perceive the sound as coming from one source, one speaker. All right. So we're going to hear the one getting to us if the delay is more than between 1 and 5 milliseconds. We're going to hear the sound as one sound, except only coming from one source. So, so if this is reaching our ear first, and this is coming to us at 1 to 5 milliseconds, it doesn't sound like it's coming from here at all. In fact, all the sound sounds like we're still hearing the energy of the sound. So the sort of overall loudness is still the combined signals, but it sounds like it's coming from only the right side. And if it's greater than 5 milliseconds, we hear them as separate sounds. So we hear kind of an echo. We hear this one, and then we hear that one. It's like kind of an echo effect. All right. So how is this useful or interesting? A lot of this is used in sort of like PA systems or in churches and like outdoor kind of PA systems and stuff like that. And this is just another expanded definition of the precedence effect. When two identical sounds are perceived in close succession, they'll be heard as a single fused sound. All right. So a lot of times, like for example, here you have this kind of, you want to hear a speaker coming from a podium here, right? But maybe the sound is quite faint. You're not getting a lot of the sound from here because you're sitting way back here. They'll put a speaker here, but then they'll have a slight delay to it. So what happens is you'll hear the sound here, and you'll hear a delayed, the same signal but slightly delayed, and it'll still sound like it's coming from over here, even though you have the speaker close to you. But you'll have a little extra power, so even though you'll perceive as if it's coming from here, even though you're getting more power, you can actually hear it more clearly because it's coming to you from both this speaker and that speaker. All right, there's another phenomenon known as the Haas effect, and this has to do with like a stereo spacing. It's a trick a lot of producers use to make a mono signal sound like it's a stereo signal. It sound like it's coming from both speakers. So a reflection arriving later than 1 to 30 milliseconds after the direct sound. So if it's no later than 30 milliseconds or about there coming, to you, you're still going to perceive those two signals as one, right? You're not going to hear those as two separate events, all right? And what generally happens is, if it's the same signal, it's gonna increase the sort of spaciousness of the actual signal. So it's gonna sound like it's coming from a wider area instead of just one place. So if you have here in the slightly delayed signal, your source is going to sound like it's coming from a wider stereo spread, from a spread. Okay, so no delay from the middle, a little bit of delay here. It's going to sound there about 0.8 milliseconds there. Okay, you're going to get a spread out image. So let's put this to the test. I have this super clatter patch here. All right, and I have a little clicky thing. So let's start it, and it's just going to have no delay. It's coming out basically both speakers, but no delay. All right, so we should hear essentially in the center. All right. Now, if I put a slight delay on the right, the signal coming out of the right, you're going to hear the stereo image expand. Right, and then a little bit longer delay, and then even longer. And you should hear that stereo image expand and expand. And then at a certain threshold, there's no longer a blend between the two sides. So that's about at 30 milliseconds. So then you lose that effect. Actually, let's make this 40 here. And you'll hear it comes back. Or it sounds like an echo. But it comes back to the middle, essentially. Okay. All right, so that's the Haas effect. That's a handy one. So let's talk a little bit about room reflections. So there's a couple things to know about reflections that happen within a room. Now, we have, of course, a source that has a direct sound. It comes directly to our ears. But then it's also bouncing off walls and stuff like that. And these signals are going to lose a little bit of their energy when they bounce off a wall. So they come to us slightly quieter. And they're going to take a little bit longer to get to us, right? So because it bounces off, the direct sound gets to us first, and then the reflections get to us later, right? And our brain interprets that information pretty effectively. So if the early reflections are the ones that happen within the first 100 milliseconds or so, all right, and they have a really strong influence on the spatial impression. So basically, those early reflections getting to us are going to give us a sense of the space. And if you ever get a chance to try this, I mean, I don't know how you would, but do a little clicking things in the space and stuff. Maybe close your eyes or blindfold yourself and then click around in a room. We actually are pretty good. It takes a little getting used to, but we're pretty good at sensing how big a space is, okay? So if you ever try that, you can click in like a large space and a small space, and you really do, without your eyes, you do get a sense with your hearing, because of these early reflections, about how big that space is and where you are in that space too, if you're closer to one wall or another wall as well, all right? Now, the ones after 100 millisecond are this reverb. So let's talk about the reverb. So reverberation time, sometimes called RT60, reverberation time, is the amount of time required for all the reflections to decay by 60 dB, right? So basically, it's a level issue. Going back here, things are bouncing off the walls and stuff like that, and they come back to our ear at a certain level, right? And then they just keep bouncing and stuff like that. Each time they lose a little bit of energy, they're a little bit quieter getting to our ears. Now, the amount of time it takes for that level difference to decay to 60 dB, that's 60 dB less than the actual direct sound, will give you your reverb tail, right? That sense of reverberation, we all know what that is, right? So basically, if you can imagine like really hard surfaces like glass or concrete or things like that, if you can picture it's kind of a concrete church, the reflections aren't losing that much energy every time they bounce off. So it takes a really long time for it to decay 60 dB. So you get these really long reverb tails, right? You get these really long times. Whereas if a room is made up of sort of absorbent materials, or the reflections are kind of kind of foiled in some way, then you'll have much less. You'll have a drier room, right? You'll have much less reverb because they're decaying quite rapidly. Okay. All right. So that'll do it for part 9 of Sound Basics, Sound Localization.